Hello. As you can see, the opening chart here is Bloomberg. Financial repression has come back to stay by Carmen Reinhart of Reinhart and Rogoff, who wrote their classic book, This Time It's Different. And this is about financial repression. Now, I can't go into exactly what financial repression is. I hope to return and do more precise stuff on it, but this gives us a vague idea and then sets it into the world of trade. This 1B, which you've just flicked onto, is a bit hard to describe, but I'll do my best. Now, we've got three lines here, and let's go to the solid blue line, which, as we can see at the top left, is 1945 to 1980. This is the classic era of financial repression to get rid of war debts from 1945 to 1980. So that's the solid line. And at the bottom, it says real interest rates. Real interest rates is your interest rate normally taken against a 5-year treasury, 10-year treasury sometimes. It all depends, but some sort of safe interest rate. Balance again against what is the considered, again, it's hard to know exactly which one to pick, but inflation rate. So if you put your money into some sort of financial instrument for a long term, over 1 year, has it lost money or gained money over the inflation rate? Now, the difference there makes the real interest rate, because say you get 5% on your financial instrument, but the inflation rate is 3%, the buying power of your money at the end of that year has gone down by, it's gone up by only 2%, not the full 5 of the interest that you've got, but you've got to take inflation into account, so you're only 2 ahead, and that would be a positive plus 2% real interest rate. But obviously at the moment it's often possible to get negative interest rates in the Western world at the moment, and that was very much in evidence from 1945 to 1980, with governments, central banks and treasuries trying to get rid of war debts. So that's solid line. Along the bottom they haven't put the 0 in, which is a bit naughty, and it goes from -1 to 2 in the middle. So between, roughly in the middle there, you've got to imagine the -1 goes to 0, +1 and then 2. And you can see that solid blue line, that there's an awful lot of it to the left-hand side of what is 0. There were an awful lot of real interest rates going down at that sort of time, 45 to 80. Right, yeah, let's move on to the spotty line, the darker spotty line, which is 1981 to 2000, which was kind of more the boom period. After the financial repression finished, it ended in an inflation period, and then there was how can I put this? The world authorities, the money authorities, crunched in on their money, giving even more, let's say, but then let the banks put out real money to the real economy. Yeah, that's the best way of putting it. And we can see there's a shift in real interest rates to the right, where it was easier to get real interest rates. Now, it's a diffusion chart, so it's hard to really get a good hold on what's going on here. And this is the Western world. Now, it's tricky, the next one, because it's 2008 till now, and it's a very tall one. But it's very tall because it's the Western world, and pigs, Greece, Portugal, Ireland and all that are involved in the Western world still. So the actual point up in interest rates is very tall, but you can see it's very shoved into the middle. It's really shoved in between -1 and +3. It's for the whole Western world. It's really shoved in there, and meaning that you really can't get any sort of high real interest rate. And in some places you're lucky to get any sort of real interest rate at all, and taking into account that that is skewed by the high interest rates on the pigs. Yeah, so it's that sort of thing that is financial repression. So I've spent a bit longer on that than I wanted. Domestic bank holding of general government debt. Now this is for 4 countries: Greece, Ireland, Portugal and the UK, and they've got various colours for the years 2006, 2008, 2010. So if you focus in on dark blue, you can see from left to right it steps up from 6, 8 till 10. The grey steps up from 6, 8, very high Portugal. The lighter blue steps up, and the UK steps up as well. This means that the governments are forcing their banks to buy the government's debt. This is another classic thing to happen in financial repression, and that grey one, Portugal, is a classic example, and they haven't put in Spain and Italy, but you can guarantee that's what will be happening in Spain and Italy as well, to force the banks to buy the government debt to get the interest rate down. But it's a very dangerous game, because the rest of the world aren't buying this debt because it's dangerous, but then you force your own banks to buy it, and it's a one-way bet. Let's go into the abyss together. Right, moving on. And this is a paragraph from the Reinhardt article. Central banks in both developed and developing countries are being subjected to complementary pressures. Emerging markets may increasingly look to financial regulatory measures to keep international capital out, especially given the expansive money policy stance pursued by the US and Europe. In other words, the US and Europe are throwing money around all over the place to try and cover their debts up. But there's not much you can invest in the United States and Europe. So that money is being grabbed hold of, and people would take it to the East and try and invest it there. And the East said, or the emerging markets say, go away with all that money, because they know it'll swamp them and cause inflation. So they say, out, damn spot. Meanwhile, advanced economies have incentives to keep capital in and create a domestic captive audience to absorb the financing for the high existing levels of public debt. In other words, they don't want any of that money going out. They want it all coming in to keep asset prices high so things don't collapse, and to keep the money there so the debts can be paid off. Right, now I'm going to shift gears, but what we're going to go to is trade, but it's got to be taken in brackets, which is financial repression, and it makes it all very, very tricky indeed, far too tricky to understand. So I'll go through it reasonably quickly to give us a quick idea. US exports to China in billions of dollars, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, going up and up and up. Not bad. And this is why the United States will want to keep their currency down, to keep their exports going up, to balance out their imports. Financial Times, US corporation tax hits a 10-year low. No surprise here. The effective, what they actually pay, the effective tax rate paid by large US public companies fell to its lowest in a decade in the fourth quarter last year, as an increasing amount of revenue was generated outside the country. They want their corporations strong, because something has to be strong, and hopefully eventually they'll get the money from those corporations. Asia Pacific, Financial Times, US to challenge China over rare earths. The US is preparing to launch a case at the World Trade Organization against China's export controls on rare earths. in a move highlighting the growing trade tensions between Washington and Beijing ahead of this year's presidential election. I don't think it's got much to do with the presidential election. It's just a sign of international tensions, as they're much more open to looking at where the money is and trying to shove it where they want it to be. Latin America and Caribbean in the Financial Times. Brazil extends tax on foreign loans. Brazil has stepped up its currency war in an effort to revive its shrinking domestic industry by extending a tax on foreign loans. In other words, that's money coming into the country to try and lend to Brazilian business, and the government stopping it at the border and taxing it as it goes in. It's the third measure this month. On Monday, Brazil's government broadened the so-called IOF transaction tax on foreign borrowing to cover any debt maturing in up to 5 years. All the same sort of thing. As an overall concept, Brazil overtakes the UK economy. Brazil has become the 6th biggest economy in the world, the country's finance minister has said. The Latin American nation's economy grew by 2.7% last year, official figures show. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research and other economic forecasters also said that Brazil had now overtaken the UK. The Brazilian economy is now worth 1.6 trillion. See, it's not, that's sixth, that's 1.6 trillion. It's really quite small, compared to to America, according to Finance Minister blah blah. But Mr. Manteiga was also keen to play down the symbolic transition which comes after China officially overtook Japan as the world's 2nd biggest economy last year. So it's the United States, China, Japan, Germany. United States, China, Japan, Germany. Am I missing one obvious one before we get to France, Brazil, UK? Am I missing one? Don't know. Next one, number 7. Japan announced a record current account deficit of, let's go, $55.4 billion, the largest since comparable records were prepared in 1985. That's a deficit. The seasonally adjusted current account surplus declined sharply to $776 billion in December. The closure of Japan's nuclear reactors is having a material impact. The yen weakened on the news. Down at the bottom, the next week's Bank of Japan meeting should be particularly interesting. The weaker yen is positive for Japanese equity markets. And everybody wants their currency down so they can get their exports up. It's a ridiculous idea. China Daily, EU to keep carbon tax. The European Union will maintain its, or should I say the European Union will maintain its carbon tax imposed on airlines operating in its airspace, the Danish climate minister said, despite a freeze in purchase of Airbus. What China's done, it had ordered lots of European aircraft and said to the European Union, if you're going to keep this carbon tax thing, you can keep your bloody aircraft. As long as an international policy on carbon emissions on airlines does not exist, in other words, if the world doesn't have a policy, Europe is going to maintain its policy, said the Danish chap that's in charge of the EU at the moment. The EU carbon tax imposed on airlines came into effect on January the 1st this year, but carriers will begin to receive bills only in 2013 after this year's carbon emissions have been assessed. And it's just an arbitrary thing. They say, well, we'll send you the bill. And China's going, oh, bloody way. Aerospace and defence in the Financial Times, delay EU carbon levy, says air industry. 7 of Europe's leading aviation companies have joined forces to warn the European Union's plans to charge for carbon pollution are jeopardizing 2,000 jobs and billions of dollars of orders from China. Airbus and 6 large European airlines said the plan to bring global airlines to the EU emissions trading scheme for carbon dioxide, which the industry has steadfastly opposed, is creating an intolerable threat to European aviation industry by opening up the possibility of trade battles with China, the US and Russia. All of this, it's too difficult to understand. Well, I don't understand it because it's so many interwoven bits that are pulling and pushing against each other. Horribly confusing. But the overall thing is that thing we started with at the beginning. There are countries that want to keep money in and there are countries that want to keep money out. But most of us live in countries that want to keep money in. And while it's in, they are going to scratch away at it and take it away from us. Basically, that's what it's about. So they can pay off their debts. So I'll finish with global finance. And if you go follow this link, you get all those blue things in line and a lot more besides that you can link to and find the most improved ratings for banks 2012, the world's 50 safest banks in Central Europe, safest banks in Asia. And this is just to say, don't keep all your money in one currency, in one place. Spread it around a bit. Pay the taxes if you have to, but spread it around a bit. So, because these government people are ruthlessly efficient and well practiced in this art of trapping money in and just taking it away bit by bit. Get it out of their little hands. And the best way is to get it out of the country, because probably you're going to have exchange rate risk, but pick countries that are likely to get positive exchange rate over time. It's very difficult, but the chances are that we in the Western world, somebody is going to have to pay the debts that are out there. And any of us that have got money, those other people will find ways of getting our money to pay their debts. Don't let them do it. Bye.